you find yourself filling your time with probably quite unimportant jobs rather than getting on with the really important ones or the big rocks or the really pressing tasks? Let me know whether you resonate with that. Or do you find yourself sitting down at your desk, you're about to get started with working, and you suddenly start scrolling, or you suddenly look over and something needs dusting, or some other job comes up that prevents you from doing what you should be doing? How many of you feel like that? How many of you wait for the moment to be right before you start the task? These are some of the signs of kind of procrastination, and they're very much interlinked, I believe, with four main things. The first one is fear of failure. Am I able to do this? Well, what happens if people judge me? What happens if it's not perfect? What happens? And we catastrophize before we've even got started. So fear of failure is a massive reason why many of us procrastinate. And you could apply this to, whether it's your finances, whether it's getting something done, whether it's doing some learning where you've purchased a course, for example, and you still haven't got around to watching that masterclass or that workshop. But fear of failure is a really big one, particularly for women in business. And that can be one of the main reasons why we just generally tend to procrastinate. The other one is perfectionism. Who struggles to make decisions because you're always wanting the perfect outcome? Now, this was a massive one and continues to be quite a big one in my life. And I'm doing a lot of deep work around this for myself, because I always attached the feeling of success to being perfect. And actually the screensaver on my phone right now simply says success has nothing to do with perfectionism, because it doesn't, does it? It really doesn't. There's lots of examples, I'm sure. If you were to grab a pen and a piece of paper, I'm sure you'd be able to come up with many examples where even if something hasn't been perfect, it's still been successful. So what's really interesting for me is to think about whatever you're not doing right now because you're procrastinating, because you're worrying about what other people are going to say, you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, or comparing yourself to somebody else's business or somebody else's financial situation, is that perfectionism mindset may actually be a massive contributor to why you're staying stuck and why you're procrastinating. The other one is lack of assertiveness. So lack of assertiveness is kind of saying yes to everything, to too many people all at the same time. You can't say no because you feel guilty. How many of you feel like that? I would definitely say there's been periods in my life and my business where I've done that. Because we do want to be liked, don't we? It's part of human DNA. We like to be connected. We like to feel connected. We like to be liked. And so we fear that, well, if I don't say yes, what's that person going to think about me? What are they going to say about me? But sometimes saying yes is actually counterproductive. It keeps you more procrastinated. It keeps you more stuck in that comparatinitis and in that perfectionism mindset. So sometimes we have to remember that it's not always about a yes and a no. Sometimes it's about a not right now. Like, yes, I'd love to work with you, but right now, looking at my diary, I have lots of commitments, but come back to me in 4 weeks' time or 3 months' time. So it's not always a yes or a no scenario, but that lack of assertiveness can often keep us stuck in procrastination. And then the other one is lack of autonomy. So this is to do with kind of feeling a sense of lack of control. And that may be because you're delaying a task or doing something because that means that you're kind of seeking some autonomy over a particular situation. That lack of control, loss of power is another really interesting one, particularly from a financial perspective, because we all want to feel in control. We all want to feel confident and in control. But actually, when we think about that word control, sometimes it's just letting go of anxieties and fears about what might happen, which is really what anxiety is all about. Anxiety is about something that hasn't necessarily even happened. And comparatinitis' main objective is to create a sense of lack. And what happens is we anchor our self-worth on everybody else. that creates a feeling of anxiety. And when we feel anxious, we find it difficult to follow advice. We find it difficult to make changes. And think about how that will relate to your life right now. Think about how that would relate to your financial situation. If we're feeling, constantly comparing ourselves, feeling anxious, feeling fearful, procrastinating, we are going to find it difficult to make changes. We're going to find it difficult to follow advice because comparisonitis gives away that power to somebody else by comparing your life to somebody else. So I'm going to give you 4 tips today as to how you can stop feeling a lack of self-worth, how you can stop procrastinating, how you can start to make better decisions. So one of the first ways that you can combat procrastination is to write down all of the reasons for delaying the task. So write down all of the things, all the excuses that you're telling yourself that is stopping you from taking action. Write them all down, get them all out on paper. And then once you've done that, so that might be, for example, I really, really need to launch or to build my audience because I want to build another income stream for myself. I want to make more money. I want to create more income. And one of the tasks that you need to do is to go and do a Facebook Live. So write down all the excuses that come up for you why you can't do a Facebook Live. I don't know how to do it. I've got spots at the moment. My hair's not been washed. I don't have a pretty background. I don't know what I'm going to say. Like, get all those excuses out. Okay. And then on the other side, write a convincing argument against each of those points. So you've got spots. Okay. Can you cover them up? Your background is not pretty. So find the best spot in your house that looks pretty. Go for a walk. I don't know what I'm going to say. Do a 5-minute research, make a couple of bullet points on what you're going to say. I don't know how to do a Facebook Live. Go and speak to somebody who does Facebook Lives and ask them how to do a Facebook Live. So come up with some kind of counter arguments against each of those points. That's tip number 1. Just that whole action of actually writing them out is really, really powerful. The second one then is to break things down into small steps. So one of my taglines on my In Her Financial Shoes podcast is small steps, big wins. Often when we find something too difficult, the brain doesn't like anything difficult, by the way. It likes to look for simple answers, simple responses. So if you're finding you're procrastinating, or you're then comparing yourself to everybody else, or you're stuck in that perfectionism mindset, then just break it down into small tasks. What's the first step that you could do that would help you create some movement forwards? Because really, it's the small steps of imperfection that create a sense of well-being. It's the small steps of perfect action that create a sense of positive well-being. Write that down. It's small steps of imperfect action. That's really what it's all about. I'll give you an example. Right now, we are redesigning our kitchen. We're having a wall taken out. We're having new units put in, an island in the middle, new flooring, new tiles. Now, when I think about it, I'm like, oh my goodness, I've got to pick the tiles. I've got to design the workspace. I've got to think about, do I need stools or not stools on the breakfast table? What flooring am I going to have? What builder do I use? Then now we need new windows in the house. What colour do I choose? And the whole project seems really, really complicated and overwhelming. So what happens is the brain goes, don't want to think about that, too difficult. I'm just going to lock down and not make any decisions because that's easier. Because the brain's, primary purpose is to protect you. So make it easy for your brain to process. What are the steps that you need to take? Right, first step, get some quotes. Second step, find a builder. Third step, choose the color of your windows. Look on Pinterest, look for some inspiration. Next step, choose the tiles. Next step, and you get kind of that small step of imperfect action will then overall create an overall sense of well-being. So that's the second tip. The third tip then is to tell other people what you're going to do in order to introduce a kind of element of accountability. So there's lots of evidence and research to show that by writing things down and saying it out loud and then telling somebody holds you more accountable to those actions. Why? Because we don't want to let people down. So it links into the whole perfectionism, judgment, comparisonitis. We want human connection. So go and tell somebody that you're going to do it. So if you're in the Money Circle membership, we do this every week. We have an accountability post and all of us commit our weekly actions and intentions because the evidence there does show that you're more likely to do it. So tell somebody you're going to do it. Give yourself like a little bit of peer pressure and accountability. And that will be really helpful if you're procrastinating. And then the fourth step or the fourth tip, I'm going to give you is to make sure that you schedule time in your diary. Okay, now this may seem like a really easy, obvious one, but if you're procrastinating about something, it might just generally be because you're overwhelmed because you don't have the time. And when I say you don't have the time, you do have the time. It's just how you prioritize that time, because time is one thing we cannot manage. We cannot manage time. We can't buy time either. So what you're giving your time away to and for, to who, and to what tasks is really important. You know, often we let those boundaries go, don't we? We just say yes to everybody and then we get massively overwhelmed because our diary is completely rammed. So the first thing is to have boundaries on your time, but also to schedule time slots. So if you need to go and do some learning or you need to go and make some decisions, put some decision time in your diary. Literally just go into your calendar, go onto your phone, put 20 minutes of dedicated decision-making time and label it decision-making time. Now, I wouldn't generally give yourself longer than 20 minutes. There's lots of research, again, that shows that 20 minutes is the optimum time to make good decisions. If it's taking you longer than 20 minutes, you've just got to make the decision anyway, because you'll never make it. If it's taking you longer than 20 minutes, it won't be a good decision. So those are my 4 tips. So let me just summarize those for you and let me know which one of these comments or tips you would like to implement for yourself. So the first one was to write down all of the reasons that you're delaying that task that's keeping you stuck in procrastination and create a convincing argument against each one of them. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to break things down into small steps. Small steps, big wins. It's the small steps of imperfection or the small steps of imperfect action that create a sense of well-being. Tip number 3 is to tell other people what you're going to do in order to create or introduce a sense of accountability and a little bit of peer pressure on yourself to get things done. And then tip number 4 is if the task is too overwhelming, remind yourself perhaps, in fact, this is an extra bonus tip for you. And I've got this written down in my notes, but tip number 4, or tip number 5 as the bonus tip is if it seems too overwhelming, just remind yourself of your past achievements and remind yourself of times when you have made good decisions and remind yourself of times when you have taken the next step in the right direction. And then the 4th tip, which I missed out there, was to schedule time in your diary, decision-making time, put it straight into the diary and then spend no longer than 20 minutes coming up with that decision. So I hope that helps. Procrastination and making better decisions is a big block. You know, it really is about fear of failure, perfectionism, lack of assertiveness or lack of autonomy. And do some work around that for yourself. You know, if it is fear of failure, then what does failure mean? And what does being perfect mean? To be 10 out of 10 perfect, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What would people be saying about it if it was 10 out of 10 perfect? Because you'll probably find that people are already saying that about you anyway. It's just that little inner critic that's coming out that's trying to protect you and trying to say, you can't do this, you're not good enough, it's not quite perfect enough yet. But that will lead to your procrastination and then comparisonitis. So I hope that's been useful. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I will see you all again soon. Take care.